What if I told you that in the second week of testing in Bahrain, Lewis Hamilton was already riding at championship pace, without anyone really being aware of it? Because while the timesheets did not always place him at the top and many spoke of adaptation, process and transition, inside the Ferrari garage the data told a completely different story. A story of long devastating runs, minimal degradation, of an SF26 that was beginning to respond like a large car, and of a Frédéric Vasseur who, according to internal numbers, did not expect to see that level so soon. What happened in those days was not spectacular at first glance. There was no iconic, headline-breaking turn. There was something much more dangerous. Consistency, perfect thermal control, intelligent energy management, and a sustained pace that, in race simulation, was beginning to fall within the range that Ferrari had set as an optimistic goal for mid-season, not for February. And this is where the big question that we are going to answer today is born. Did Hamilton already find the SF26 sweet spot before the season actually started? The second week of testing in Bahrain began with a strange feeling inside the Ferrari garage. It wasn't euphoria, it wasn't media pressure, it wasn't that typical anxiety of the first days of filming. It was something much more technical and silent. Engineers wanted to confirm whether what they had seen in small flashes during the first phase could hold up under more realistic conditions. And that's where everything changed. During those days, the focus was not on chasing headlines or chasing fast laps to top the table. Ferrari worked with high fuel loads, full race simulations and programs focused on aerodynamic stability and energy management. And it was in that context that what is now defined as Hamilton's hidden rhythm appeared. It was not an isolated performance spike. It was a sequence of constant laps, with controlled degradation and a minimal drop in times as the stint progressed. The internal data began to show something that broke the initial forecasts. The SF26, in Hamilton's hands, entered an extremely stable operating window when small parameters such as rear height, brake balance and energy recovery maps were correctly adjusted. What was surprising was not only the average speed, but the ease with which the driver managed to keep the car within that optimal range for many consecutive laps. In modern Formula One, where tire management defines the actual race pace, that consistency is more valuable than any isolated fastest lap. While other teams showed more pronounced fluctuations in their long runs, the Ferrari seemed to settle on a performance plateau. It didn't fall sharply. It did not show aggressive overheating peaks. The degradation was kept under control, and that allowed the averages to get dangerously close to the records that Ferrari had internally projected as an advanced goal for the season. That was the moment Vasseur understood that something was not following the planned script. Because the original plan contemplated a progressive adaptation process. Hamilton came from a huge structural change, new technical environment, new aerodynamic philosophy, new work dynamics. The logical thing was to expect ups and downs. However, in the second week of Bahrain, what the long simulations showed indicated that synchronization between driver and car was occurring earlier than projected. It wasn't just about talent. It was an accurate reading of the car's behavior under real load. Another key element was the saved margin. Ferrari did not use extreme settings or aggressive engine maps. The power was not fully released and the electrical deployment was not squeezed to its maximum. Even so, times remained within competitive ranges compared to external references. That implies that the absolute potential could be even greater when conditions are fully competitive. This is the whole point of Act 1. What happened in the second week was not a visible spectacle, it was an internal validation. Hamilton did not need to dominate publicly. He needed to prove he could sustain a real race pace with controlled degradation and consistent aerodynamic stability. And he achieved it before the project was fully optimized. What seemed like an adaptation phase began to transform into a silent warning. Ferrari discovered that the SF26's potential ceiling could be higher than they had initially calculated. And when that happens so early in the year, it completely changes technical and strategic planning. Because when engineers began to cross-reference Hamilton's data with simulation references, something even more disturbing appeared. The room for improvement was not in pure speed, it was in the optimization of the assembly. That is to say, the SF26 was not at its peak, and yet it was already moving in competitive ranges and long runs. In the second week of Bahrain, when the car entered its correct window of rear height and aerodynamic balance, the Briton achieved something very specific. Keeping the tire within the ideal thermal range for more consecutive laps than in the team's previous simulations. It wasn't that the car magically degraded less, was that the pilot was modulating energy, braking and acceleration in a way that avoided the peaks that generate overheating. That is pure experience. Furthermore, work with the energy recovery maps showed another key signal. Ferrari was testing conservative configurations in electrical deployment. They weren't using the most aggressive modes. However, the average return did not plummet. That indicates efficiency. And when a car is efficient with contained maps, it means that the maximum potential has not yet been exposed. Here the moment of internal shock occurs. Because in the original planning, the range of times Hamilton set in that long simulation was labeled optimistic mid-season, not as an initial base. That completely alters the development schedule. If the starting point is already close to the projected goal, then the ceiling may be higher than thought. And there is another important detail that explains why this was not visible to the public. Ferrari did not look for fast final laps. They didn't make a spectacular mock qualifying run to make headlines. The focus was 100% structural. Understanding degradation, high fuel stability, and consistency under full downforce. That's why the rhythm was hidden. Because it wasn't designed to impress outside the garage. Meanwhile, the external environment analyzed timetables without seeing the entire film. The real story was in the averages, in the minimal drop in performance lap after lap, in the absence of sudden oscillations. In modern Formula One, where the difference between a champion car and a ragged one can be just a tenth sustained over 50 laps, that kind of consistency changes everything. When Hamilton's last long stint in that second test session ended, the engineers were no longer validating whether the car worked. They were trying to understand how far he could go. And that difference is enormous. What the data revealed was not simply that the SF26 was competitive. It was that the car had a solid structural foundation, a clear operating window, and most importantly, a driver capable of exploiting it surgically even without using extreme settings. That completely changes the strategic approach prior to the actual start of the season. Because when a team discovers that its starting point is closer to the projected objective, development stops being reactive and becomes aggressive. Vasseur understood something key at that moment. The risk was not to rush evolution, the risk was not taking advantage of the structural advantage they had found so early. Driver-car synchronization was not only ahead of schedule, but also showed stability under full load, high fuel, and conservative map conditions. And this is where the concept of hidden rhythm becomes a real threat. In Formula One, championships are not won by a brilliant lap in qualifying, they are won by the ability to sustain performance for 50 laps without thermal collapse or losing aerodynamic balance. In Bahrain, in that second week, Hamilton demonstrated precisely that he could keep the SF26 within its ideal window without pushing it to the limit. That means there is still room. Margin in power, margin in electrical deployment, margin in aggressive adjustments that were not used during the tests. And when there is margin, there is evolution. And when there is evolution with a solid base, there is a real championship projection. The most disturbing thing is not what was seen. This is what was not shown. Ferrari did not need to show its strongest card. He didn't look for headlines. He did not try to set the absolute best time. He worked in silence. And in that silence, evidence appeared. The SF26 is not a fragile car, it is not a capricious car. It is a car that, in the right window, responds with consistency. And Hamilton already found that window. The second week of testing in Bahrain did not leave thunderous headlines, it did not leave a historic lap that broke the stopwatches or a viral image celebrating the best time. What he left behind was something much more dangerous for the rest of the grid. Silent evidence. Evidence that the SF26 has a solid technical foundation. Evidence that its operating window is more stable than Ferrari projected. And, above all, evidence that Lewis Hamilton has already understood how to exploit that car in real racing conditions. The so-called hidden rhythm is not a media concept. It is a pattern repeated in long runs. Controlled degradation, thermal stability, consistency lap after lap, and energy efficiency even with conservative maps. And that, in modern Formula One, is the basis of any championship project. Vasseur was not surprised by a fast lap. He was surprised because the internal numbers fell within the optimistic range that the team had set for mid-season. And that happened in the second week of testing. That changes the entire narrative. It is no longer a long adaptation process. This is a synchronization ahead of the calendar. Ferrari didn't show everything. It did not release maximum electrical deployment. He didn't use aggressive maps. He didn't look for headlines. And yet, the career average remained at competitive levels. The real conclusion is this. If this was the Ferrari in content mode, in analysis mode, in test mode, the real potential is yet to be revealed. The second week in Bahrain was not a simple technical test. It was a silent warning to the championship. And when a 7-time champion finds the right window before the season starts, the story often takes a very different turn. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.